Please welcome Bill Gates and the Bill Gates Dancers.
He started out as a shy, computer-obsessed teenager and ended up the richest man in the world.
Lifestyles of the rich and famous. No, that's never been Bill Gates. You get this sense that the money is almost an annoyance to him.
William Henry Gates III, most people just call him Bill Gates, has built an empire by thinking way outside the box.
I have no doubt that 100 years from now, he will be talked about in the same way that Rockefeller and Carnegie and Ford are talked about, as people who transformed an era.
Now, after leading the digital revolution and facing several government antitrust battles, Bill Gates is a different man than he was just a few years ago. He's a devoted father and an avid golfer who just happens to have a portfolio worth $50 billion. He could rest on his laurels, but that's not the Bill Gates style.
What makes Gates so competitive is that he finds it fun. He finds this like a thrilling game, like the games he used to play as a kid.
He's loved and respected, hated and reviled. But one thing neither detractors nor supporters can deny is the lasting impact Bill Gates has had on our time. The values that shaped Bill Gates as one of the business titans of the 20th century go back to his roots in the Great Northwest. Bill's great-grandfather, J.W. Maxwell, founded the First National Bank in Seattle. The Maxwells enjoyed their privileges and social position, but were never ostentatious about their wealth. Their son, Willard, also a banker, and his wife, Adele, who had a passion for playing cards, were among Seattle's top civic leaders. Their only child, Mary, a girl who made a name for herself as a student leader at the University of Washington. Athletic and outgoing, Mary Maxwell was sometimes referred to as Giggles. Her drive and energy struck everyone who came in contact with her.
There tends to be a handful that is right at the core of the action. Mary was at the core of the action. Mary was unaffected, straightforward, charming, but immensely determined.
It was at the university that Mary Maxwell met and fell in love with a quiet, scholarly young man, Bill Gates Jr., who would go on to become one of Seattle's most prominent attorneys. When Bill and Mary wed in 1951, she decided to give up a career as a teacher to raise a family and devote time to charitable work. The first of the Gates' 3 children, Christy, was born in 1953. She was followed by a brother, Bill Gates III, born on October 28, 1955. He was given the nickname Trey.
That derives from the fact that he was William H. Gates III. And card players in the family think of anything with a 3 as being a Trey, so he became Trey.
His mother had an extremely close relationship with Bill from the start. She even took him with her when she volunteered as a lecturer in Seattle schools. It wasn't long before her precocious son would read the World Book Encyclopedia from A to Z.
We'd lose him sometime for hours at a time, and when I would ask, "What are you doing?" he'd say, "I'm thinking, Mother."
The Gates family prized competition, and young Bill loved testing his mettle in outdoor activities and indoor games. Among his favorite board games were Risk, in which the object is world domination, and the perennially popular Monopoly, where, with a bit of luck, anyone can become a tycoon.
He was competitive in cards with his sister, races to see who could do jigsaw puzzles faster, ski racing, sailing, whatever. He wanted to do it well and as good as the other folks that he was with.
Every summer, the Gates went off to their place on the Hood Canal called Cheerio. It was here that Bill, his younger sister Libby, and the rest of the family joined friends in staging their own Olympic Games.
If you stayed overnight and had a couple of days with them, you would come away exhausted from games and activity. It was a very lively scene. It was definitely competitive, there's no question about it, and the children were all part of that. There was never a dull moment.
The first World's Fair in the United States in 22 years.
When the Seattle World's Fair opened in 1962, the Gates family rushed to see the wonders predicted for the 21st century, including computer technology.
Imagine, if you can, an electronic brain.
Bill often returned to visit the high-tech exhibits. It was already math and science. But he was also becoming something of a loner, showing signs of preteen rebelliousness that was putting him at odds with his mother.
Mary and I grew up in very orderly families where parents were controlling personalities, and we carried that forward. And that particular mode wasn't exactly consistent with Bill or Trey, who somewhere around about began to be very independent emotionally. He was quite willing to make up his own mind about what he wanted to do and not do, and that was really tough for us, particularly for Mary.
He was kind of lost. I mean, he was ill at ease in school, wasn't sure exactly how he wanted to spend his time. Obviously a very smart, brilliant kid, but kind of lacking direction. And he went through some counseling at that time. He went through a change in his school.
Although they believed in public education, Bill's parents felt he would find more direction and discipline at Lakeside, Seattle's best private prep school. He began to blossom at Lakeside.
He was an excellent math student. He was excellent across the board. I mean, he was a superb drama student and interested in reading all different kinds of books and so forth. So he wasn't just totally math science oriented. He had a wide breadth of interests.
When Bill started high school in 1969, the U.S. space program was at its peak. Apollo 11 took men to the moon that July.
The Eagle has landed.
But the computers that made it possible were still electronic giants that cost millions of dollars and required an army of people to run. Most schools at that time could never consider buying a big computer, but Lakeside had made an extraordinary deal that would be fateful for Bill Gates. A Seattle company offered the use of its computer through a teletype linked to the school. Young Gates was entranced by the possibilities of this primitive machine and started spending every free moment in the computer room.
The story has often been told, and it's completely true, that he would get up at night and leave and go over to work on the computer and come back, and we wouldn't know that he'd been gone.
Bill Gates shared this addiction with upperclassman Paul Allen, who could not have been more different from Gates. He was not only 2 years older, but substantially larger. Where Allen was quiet and contemplative by nature, Bill could be shrill and confrontational. Nevertheless, this odd couple was destined to make history together. While attending Seattle's prestigious Lakeside Prep School, Bill Gates met Paul Allen, an upperclassman who shared his obsession with computers.
They bonded by writing software code together and somewhat competitive. They every now and then would have fights. At one point, Paul Allen kicked Bill Gates, who was a little bit younger, off of the little group they had who was writing software. But then he realized that he needed Gates back. He couldn't do it without him. And Gates said, well, I'm happy to come back, but this time I'm going to be in charge.
By 1970, when Bill was just 15, he and Paul Allen went into business together. The two boys netted $20,000 with TrafoData, a computerized program they created to measure traffic flow in the Seattle area. Although Bill had the luxury of family money, he was determined from the start to make his own fortune.
The father of one of Bill's boyhood friends said Bill always had a nose for the dollar. Even as a kid, he knew the value of a contract and even had a contract to use his older sister's baseball mitt that was signed in a legal document.
In the summer of 1972, at the age of 17, Bill went to Washington, D.C. to work as a Senate page. This exposure to politics and government would come in handy later on. Back home that fall, he took a leave of absence from school when he and Paul Allen got their first real jobs with a computer company. They began talking about company, but the Gates insisted that their son finish high school and attend college.
His mother used to worry that he was socially awkward. Well, maybe he was, but he had other things on his mind, and he was not rude, he was not abrupt. He was marching to a different drummer. He's a genius, and he has a different agenda.
Bill graduated from Lakeside in 1973, and his parents took great pride in his acceptance at Harvard University. So he left Seattle and headed east to Cambridge, Massachusetts. As a freshman at Harvard, he thought briefly about preparing for a career in law, but no course of study ignited his imagination like his work with the computer.
Bill was somebody who was always very determined to do what he was interested in doing. The things that he was less interested in, which often included his academic classes, he tended simply to coast and get by on talent. I remember there was a course in Introduction to Greek Literature where he'd really done, as best as I could tell, none of the work during the year. Stayed up all night the night before the exam, slept through part of the exam, and still got a B.
It was not surprising that Gates fell asleep in an exam. Between classes and time spent at the Harvard Computer Center, he seemed to be on the go 24 hours a day.
I mean, he was always very focused on whatever it was that he was doing. He could come into his room, not get undressed, just kind of lie down on his bed, which of course would be not made because he had never had time for that, and just fall asleep. Door open, fully clothed, lie down, sleep, and then when he's refreshed, boom, back up at it and whatever the next thing was.
Bill paused long enough to make some lasting friendships at Harvard, but his social life was not a priority. He dated only occasionally, with varying degrees of success.
I interviewed several women who had dated Bill just briefly, and one told me the very first question was, what did you score on your SAT test? You know, this is not exactly, you know, what a young woman wants to hear. For Bill Gates, though, he had scored a perfect 800 on his math portion of the SAT, and this was a matter of pride with him, and he wanted to make sure whoever he was dating, you know, had scored a pretty high grade.
Bill did shine in math, but true to form, when he found out that he was not the #1 math student at Harvard, he decided against becoming a mathematician. While he kept his academic options open, he picked up some new skills outside of class.
Spent a great deal of time playing pinball, video games, and especially poker, which was something that we all did a lot of back in college.
But it was Paul Allen, Bill's former schoolmate and business partner, who delivered Gates' biggest stroke of luck. Allen had moved to Boston from Seattle for a job. In December of 1974, he picked up a magazine in Harvard Square. Popular Electronics announced the arrival of the world's first mini-computer kit, the Altair 8800. He rushed to show it to Bill. Gates and Allen knew instantly that the day of the personal computer had arrived.
They saw that this was going to be an incredible force, an incredible dynamic for the society, and recognized the moment.
The Altair was made by a small company in Albuquerque, New Mexico, not far from the former atomic testing grounds at Alamogordo. Ed Roberts, who ran the company, was looking for someone to create software to run on his unique little computer. Gates and Allen convinced him that they were the ones who could do it, and worked day and night at the Harvard Computer Center for 2 months. In February of 1975, Paul Allen went to Albuquerque to test the program he and Gates had completed. When he loaded the Altair with what Bill Gates called the coolest code I ever wrote, it worked. The importance of that moment would change Bill Gates and the software industry forever. In the summer of 1975, 19-year-old Bill Gates and his partner Paul Allen formed Microsoft. Their ongoing work with Ed Roberts' Altair computer company became so consuming that Bill dropped out of Harvard just before his senior year and moved to Albuquerque. Mary Gates was vision.
We told him that we'd put some money aside for him to attend school, and if he didn't finish in a few years, we'd have to make some other use of those funds. And by that time, he allowed us out. That would be okay. He'd probably be able to afford to go back if and when the time came.
Bill was certain that he had made the right decision, but making it in software wouldn't be so easy. The personal computer scene at that time was populated by users who were eager to share new information and software without paying for it. It was a practice that put Bill at odds with his peers.
You know, it was a bunch of high school kids and college kids who were doing something very non-mainstream. And Bill was very unpopular because he said, hey guys, don't steal this stuff. We made it and we own it. And that was, yeah, he was one of the business guys in what was a lot of geek hackers.
In fact, Gates wrote an open letter to computer hobbyists, chastising them about making copies of Microsoft's program. He stated, as the majority of hobbyists must be aware, most of you steal your software. Hardware must be paid for, but software is something to share. Who cares if the people who worked on it get paid? Is this fair? But those who have been reported to us may lose in the end.
He was looked at as kind of a renegade, and it was different, you know, a different ethic than prevailed at that time. But I'm not sure that the software industry would have evolved in anywhere near the way it has without somebody standing up and saying that that was necessary.
Bill had also been battling with Ed Roberts, who considered him spoiled and obnoxious. The two disagreed about almost everything, and Roberts was a formidable adversary.
Ed Roberts was a massive man, something like 6'6", weighed 300 pounds. Here Bill Gates was. I mean, he formed Microsoft at age 19, and he looked like he was 13 years old. He was standing up to this bear of a man, going face-to-face with him and screaming and shouting matches.
A final confrontation came in May of 1977, when Roberts sold his business, and Gates had to sue to keep the software he and Paul Allen created for the company. Gates won.
We take a hard line on software.
Microsoft expanded into new software languages, and Gates and Allen started to sell their products to other computer companies. At the end of 1978, with sales approaching the 1 million mark, they moved Microsoft from Albuquerque to Seattle. Bill was glad to be back and went into high gear to promote his hometown company.
We always design with the future in mind. Our research people are always tracking the latest in hardware and software technology.
It was Bill Gates who was actually the real marketing genius behind Microsoft. Early on, he was the one who was actually going out on the road and trying to sell this company and its software. And oftentimes, he would take his mother with him on these trips.
Bill's highly respected and well-connected mother would come to play a pivotal role in his early career.
Mary served on a number of corporate boards as well as the University of Washington. She was on the National Board of United Way. Also on the National Board of United Way was the CEO of IBM, which is how her son met the CEO of IBM, through her.
What would your ideal home computer be like?
By November of 1980, IBM was banging on the door of the fledgling Microsoft.
Without an overpowering price.
The largest maker of computers in the world now wanted to talk to Gates and Allen about coming up with an operating system for their new line of personal computers. From their first meeting, IBM misjudged who they were dealing with.
He looked like a sub-teen, you know, he was skinny, had a real mop of hair, you know, kind of casual, and basically people didn't take him seriously as a business person.
But the IBM brass soon discovered Gates was no amateur. He quickly convinced them that Microsoft could deliver their new software. First, he purchased an existing operating system, which he then adapted for the IBM personal computers, calling it MS-DOS.
Bill Gates, as he's often done as a shrewd businessman, knew where to get an operating system. He just went down the road a few miles and bought it for $50,000. But then the real brilliance was that when they developed that operating system for IBM, IBM wanted to buy the source code, which would have given them the disk operating system, or what became known as DOS. And instead, Microsoft refused to actually sign the rights over to DOS.
By not owning the rights to the operating system, IBM would now have to pay Microsoft a licensing fee for every copy of DOS installed on its computers.
It can help a manager excel.
IBM was also about to lose its tremendous edge in computer sales.
The IBM personal computer.
As other companies introduced personal computers that were cheaper than IBM's, Microsoft was able to sell the same operating system to all of them.
There were all kinds of computers that were being conceived at that point in time. And it struck me that I don't know who will win in the hardware business, but Microsoft has a very good chance to win in the software. business.
Between 1978 and 1981, Microsoft's growth was staggering. The staff was enlarged from 13 employees to 128. Revenues mushroomed from $4 to $16 million. By 1983, 30% of all the personal computers in the world were running Microsoft software. Still, Bill Gates never took his eye off the bottom line.
He never flew first class unless it was absolutely necessary. You would often find him sitting in coach, in fact with a blanket over his head so he could get some sleep. So his parents taught him well early on the value of money and hard work, and translated later into his life with not only how he ran his personal life, but how he ran Microsoft.
My name is Bill Gates. I'm chairman of Microsoft.
This was an exciting time for an industry run mostly by people under 30. Microsoft began working on software for innovative companies like Apple and its guru, Steve Jobs. Their Macintosh computer and software were considered by many to be the most ingenious in the industry and the way of the future.
To create a new standard, it takes something that's really new and really captures people's imagination. And the Macintosh, of all the machines I've ever seen, is the only one that meets that standard.
But it wouldn't be long before Microsoft and Apple would be locked in a bitter struggle over the rights to the next generation of software. Bill Gates was also about to receive news that would rock Microsoft to its very foundation.